code base they use is about 10 years old, and it's this sea of hacks. And you sort of look at it and it's just like, how on earth can this work?
Right.
But the surprising thing is, it does, and it works very well.
Yeah.
So you get this 10-year-old code base, and you can't work with it at all, but it will just work. It's brilliant in that regard. And then you get Coreboot, which is, does everything to, the specification. If it doesn't, adhere to the specification, it's wrong. We're not going to do it.
Welcome back to another episode of Nerding Out with Viktor. Today, I'm joined by Sean Rhodes from Star Labs. Welcome, Sean.
Hi there.
Good to have you on. So this is going to be another Linux on a desktop, kind of Linux in the supply chain, Linux in general kind of episode. So I'm really excited to have you on. You guys have been in this space for a while now. And maybe let's start with the most basic things. Who's Sean and what's Star Labs? Let's start there.
So we've been going 8 years now, and it was literally just a bunch of us wanting something to run Linux reliably, 100% selfish reasons, and it sort of evolved there, and sort of Coreboot with all the licensing and the goodness that comes with that, and then a bunch of other things. I mean, half the things we do are because people we ask us to do them, so we've kind of just gone with the flow. But yeah, I primarily work on the firmware side. Corporate-y stuff. So yeah,
good. I mean, let's talk Coreboot, right? Because Coreboot, I've had an episode of Coreboot, had people on there about that. For those not familiar with Coreboot or people who haven't watched that episode, it's obviously important to you guys in terms of your blueprint for your SIF machinery. Talk to me about what Coreboot. What's Coreboot and what should people know about that, and why it's important?
Well, I mean, aside from all the things it does actually really well, it fits quite well with Linux. Obviously, kernel's GPL2'd. Coreboot used to be called Linux BIOS. So yeah, it just fits well with sort of the ethos being open source. And then if you take all the licensing and stuff out of the equation, it's good. I mean, the code quality is very high. Things are very fast, very efficient. It's very easy to maintain sort of across boards. So sort of when we're doing things here, we're doing an update for something that we made 3 months ago. That's going to apply to something we made 8 years ago, and it just makes maintenance a lot better. So yeah, and translates into the end users who've got 8-year-old machines getting updates, which is it's good.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because obviously I guess people don't really think about BIOSes too much, right? Let's preface it. But Coreboot is a BIOS, right? So let's start with those stuff familiar with that. What in terms of the trade-offs and in terms of getting this up and running, delivering Coreboot, what have you been experienced with that? Because that's obviously it's diving into the deep end of the pool rather than just getting something off the shelf from AMI or something. What has your experience with that in the supply chain world?
Well, yeah. So I mean, AMI. Love and hate relationship there. I mean, the code base they use is about 10 years old, and it's this sea of hacks, and you sort of look at it and it's just like, how on earth can this work?
Right.
But the surprising thing is, it does, and it works very well.
Yeah.
So you get this 10-year-old code base, and you can't work with it at all, but it will just work. It's brilliant in that regard. And then you get Coreboot, which is does everything to the specification. If it doesn't adhere to the specification, it's wrong. We're not going to do it. It doesn't matter if the device doesn't work, but it's matching the specification type thing. So when you're going for a new platform, you get Coreboot working, you do your our sort of vendor code side of things, and then the common directory usually doesn't work because it hasn't been that tested in real world things with devices that don't comply to specifications and all sorts of things. So I guess the experience with Coreboot is to generally get it working to the specifications is actually quite easy compared to AMI, and then you have to do all the sorts of tweaking afterwards. Whereas AMI is the other way around. Get it working for your stuff is harder, but then all this hacky old mess of stuff will just magically work on anything.
That's the thing. It's the perfect theory versus the pragmatic kind of. It kind of works, but nobody kind of knows why it works.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
because if you poke around, because I got one of you guys boxes here. This is the Byte, I believe. Yeah, the bite. And that's a good example of that is, well, at least for the viewers who haven't seen it, this is the bite. Bite 2, is it? Bite 1? I actually don't know. Is it?
That looked like a 2. The
Yeah.
N200 one, so that's the fanless one, and then we're on a
Yeah.
3 now, which is called the fan.
Yeah. But a good example of Coreboot there is something like Secure Boot is actually rather challenging to do well with Coreboot, right? So
Yeah,
what has your experience been with that, right? To get that working right now with Secure Boot and like getting a full featured BIOS, I guess, instead of just that super sliver custom use case like Chromebooks. They're very narrow scope of what they need the BIOS to do, right? Versus off-the-shelf commodity PCs.
Yeah, definitely. I think it depends on where you're viewing as getting it working. I mean, me and Matt, I think you had on for your Coreboot topic, are both very much in the mind of working is when it's been upstreamed and it's been reviewed by multiple people, and that's your perfect working state. Which when you think Secure Boot, you're getting patches into Coreboot side, and you're also getting patches into EDK2 side. Whereas EDK2 is less focused on Coreboot's implementation and more on slim bootloaders, so you've got a whole load of complexity in just upstreaming it. In terms of getting it working, it's not horrific. Generally, most of the challenges lie in getting Coreboot to talk to EDK2.
Right.
But yeah, I think the Coreboot Secure Boot patches were sort of faffing around for about a couple of years, sort of in various states, and then they finally got merged. I think it was about a year ago.
Okay.
And yeah, so that's all working nicely now. And then the next stage is get it to enrolling the keys automatically upstream, which I mean that's going to be another 2 years easy. Because pulling from other repos and stuff in EDK2 is complicated. To say the least.
Interesting. I'm curious about where your head is at with regards to, so obviously the BIOS is still in the whole like EFI kind of world mentality or world view, right? But then you have companies out there like Oxide who says, well, you know what? Screw BIOS. Well, not screw BIOS, but screw bootloaders in general. And just like they bypass that entire step. Like, what is your view on like how that adoption is going to drive beyond like the extreme edge case that is, I guess, Oxide?
I think it will stay as an edge case. I mean, over the years, played with sort of different payloads with Coreboot, and if your end goal is to run Linux, you can get Coreboot to start the kernel straight away. And there's a whole load of simplification there. There's obviously an armada of drawbacks. Windows, forget about it, which is still a chunk of our user base who dual boot or have to use it every now and then. Dual booting, updating is just a nightmare, and then you're getting compatibilities with firmware matching and things like that. So it's really cool as something you can do, but I don't think it's ever going to evolve out of someone building it for themselves realistically or buying something super specific. It'd be nice if there was, but I don't see it happening.
I mean, I guess the Chromebook is a good example of something like that. It's a tailor-built machine that is building a tailored OS. I mean, Chrome OS, right? Where they can strip all those components off and just like remove, I guess, the entire attack surface from like the BIOS as well, right?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think the depth charge that they use is probably a 50th of the size of EDK2. So just a lot less to work with and go wrong. Right.
All right. Let's get out of the rabbit hole that is Coreboot that I'm happy to explore further. But I think for the sanity of our viewers, let's move on out of that particular pocket and talk more about Star Labs. Let's talk about your product. Obviously, we showed the Byte 2 rather. Talk me through about your experience so far building hardware from like where you started to the Byte 2, which I believe is the last product that you have shipped, right?
We're Byte 3 now.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
But yes, way back when we started off doing the Clevo thing, same as many other vendors, and Clevo's kind of a mixed bag. They're very hard to fault, but we wanted something that you could sort of like, a little bit more sort of aesthetically pleasing and tailored. So we set about building it, and I think the issue you hit first with building hardware is the tooling costs being so high. Compared to Apple and Dell, when they've got £300,000 to play in tooling, but then they're splitting it over hundreds of thousands of models, and when we're in a niche already, and then we keep burrowing into a niche because that's what people ask us to do, then it becomes quite costly. So it's a balance. Because a lot of people say, well, one example would be, can you put a charging port on either side of your chassis? And so that's one of the things. That's tooling costs. The actual production cost is infinitely small. But when you're talking, most people will, predominantly right-handed, they plug their charger on the left. For the small part who want it on either side, is that $75,000 split over however many machines? Is it worth it?
Interesting enough, Apple do on the left.
Yes, they do. Yeah, I think that is literally going for the the masses. Everyone's right-handed. Most people are right-handed, and you plug in on the left. I guess that's the default. Some laptops do have it either side, but it's one of those things where you're just weighing up pros and cons of costs and things like that.
So you started. I mean, so where do you even start, right? Because you going to build something from scratch today is, like you said, tooling costs extremely expensive, right? Like your MOQs, because I mean, most vendors who do, I guess, white label-ish PCs, like if you look at the PC market, there are very few people that make PCs, right? There are very, very few. Most of them are customized nukes or like a nuke board with some custom casing. Like very, very few vendors out there would go and say, I want to build a board myself. Like I guess the hyperscalers would do that, but like for the vast majority, like that's extreme rare. But that's the approach you guys have decided to go down, right? Tailoring things from basically zero and build it from that ground up, and that's playing in the hard lane for sure.
Yes. So when we first started it, we were very adamant. We want to make it. We don't want to share anything. And then sort of, I guess, reality dawned. When you get to something like a battery. So it was a topic on our laptop Mark III. So you're probably talking 5-6 years ago. We had a chassis and we could put, I think it was a 52 watt-hour battery in it. But the tooling costs, which weren't horrific, I think they're about 40,000. But then you get all your certifications, certifying an individual battery because of explosion, fire, blah blah blah, is insanely high. So we ended up using a off-the-shelf 45 watt-hour battery. So that was one of those things where we could have done a bigger battery. If it was Apple or Dell, they probably would have done. We didn't because it becomes inefficient.
But so do you do all the PCB design yourself, and then you work with? I presume you don't, because you're based in the UK.
Yes.
You don't do manufacturing in the UK, right? You do them I presume in China, like most other people do, right? Like.
Yeah. So the presence in the UK is finishing its pop a PCB in, burn the firmware, screwdrivers, nothing, no big machinery. Most parts are sort of China or Taiwan. It's one of those really strange things you follow around the globe because you have processors coming from the States and you have parts coming from Taiwan and Japan and stuff, and it comes over to us. So all the countries kind of don't make too much sense in all that regard.
And that's what when people say bring home all the manufacturing, when you actually do this, you realize that it's near impossible to do it. Like even like a company like Apple is struggling greatly to bring manufacturing to the US because the tooling that you need to do a PCB is like there are like a handful of factories on the planet who can do them. Maybe from like there aren't that many that can actually do all these like lower level components, right?
That's right. And then, I mean, less of an issue for Apple, but more for us. We'd be having to pay for that tooling in full, whereas put it simply, we're just renting a machine to make things. The age old. I mean, because the way we do it, we are technically allowed to say they're made in the UK because of the way they put together the different bits and stuff, but we don't because it seems deceptive because of the amount of stuff that's made in China and the States and Taiwan and wherever else. So it's one of those.
Yeah, exactly. In your journey so far, what has been the absolutely most hardest thing to do in terms of building your supply chain from zero? And obviously, compared to Apple on a shoestring budget, right?
Yes, yeah.
And also playing the hard lane, like not going to an ODM and say, put this board in different case.
I think it's been getting the sort of stock rolling, because we sort of build things, and the MOQs are big. So some things you're buying 5,000 off, sometimes you're buying 1,000. So you've got to line all of these up. Some bits are put together in one place, and then they're moved to another place to put in, and then you've got to ship them over in time. So it's literally getting a consistent supply of stock. That is possibly your hardest thing in the world. And also you factor in that our stuff takes us longer to make. I'm sure Clevo can churn something out in probably about 4 weeks. I don't know what it is. It's now. But with us, it's sort of an 8-week minimum. It's usually closer to 12 weeks. From once we say, right, we want these bits to be together. So getting all of that together, whilst also keeping up to date. 12 weeks time, there could be a new processor or whatever else it is. Aligning all that to consistent stock is, it is almost impossible. We've been doing this 8 years, and we've, I think, probably twice had everything on our store in stock. Also, once you get the stock consistent, and then you're shipping them out, and it's all nice and stable, and then you get more orders, and then they're sold out again. So
you also have to do some fair bit of forecasting, right? Because you don't know exactly. I mean, particularly if you have a product line, like you don't know exactly what's going to sell when, and so forth. Like there are a lot of dynamics that are difficult to predict, of course.
Yes, definitely.
So looking at that experience, and like timing obviously has been very, very difficult. But right now you make the boards in the UK, in China or Taiwan, ship them to the UK, assemble things in the UK. You flash all the firmwares in the UK, I presume, then, so that they are fresh, up to date, and they dispatch from the UK, right?
Yes.
So that's because that's the thing that, at least when I started doing supply chain at Screenly, when we started buying buying software from ODMs in China, or firmware, buying device from China, is the firmware. I think a lot of people underestimate the importance of that, because when you speak to ODMs in China, they view themselves as hardware vendors and box pushers, not software vendors, right? And I think that mentality is so different, right? I'm curious about what your experience with, like, BIOS firmware is one of those things. So they're like, hey, yeah, it's just 5-year-old BIOS. Like, who cares? It's working. And yes, binary.
Yeah. I mean, we've done some tests. So, I mean, Intel stuff, you roughly follow reference design. So there'll always be a version of AMI that will boot, and it's designed to, not be efficient, but will boot on, similar-ish hardware. So when we get our stuff, when we're first doing it, you'll chuck this on it just so you can actually check, things are working. And the efficiency is horrific. You're talking sort of, if you're like a 25 watt, processor laptop, you'll be getting sort of, 2 hours battery. Whereas once you get Coreboot on and everything actually configured, you'll be, 12 hours battery. So it's just, it's bad. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the sort of, white labeled stuff, the stuff on that, it's never touched, and it's not optimized, because they just use that reference thing, change, logo and name, and they think job done.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think at least for me, the big wake up call for this was when logo fail and Pixie fail happened, right? And that's when you were like, that was probably the first time in probably a decade I started thinking about BIOS again. Because like, if you live in the Mac ecosystem, like it's a black box, but it's kind of like it's firmware. Everything is managed for you, right? So you never think about components, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, and when that happened, you're like, oh crap, how do we do this? And that's when you realize the lack of sophistication most ODMs have when it comes to getting these firmware updates and BIOS updates and life cycle of that. That was, at least for us, that was a big insight into like why we need to move our supply chain away from those ODMs, right? I'm curious about your experience there, because I would imagine you have had similar conversations with a lot of these ODMs and OEMs and manufacturers overall.
Yes, yeah. I mean, our sort of engagement on that side has sort of died down, because we used to do the. It's probably about 4 years ago now. We used to offer AMI alongside Coreboot. That was when the sort of Coreboot common features were lacking a bit. So with all our AMI
Yeah.
licenses, so we take that reference and actually make it work and provide updates
Yeah.
for it. So yeah, we haven't really touched, should we say, their version of it for a very long time.
Right.
For numerous reasons.
Fair enough. All right, interesting. So talking about laptops and desktop, laptop and I guess mini PCs, I guess is the proper word for these devices you're shipping. How different has that been, like in terms of like building a laptop from scratch versus building a mini PC from scratch? Because I obviously, at least to me, a laptop feels like a lot more complicated in terms of like the component that goes in there. Obviously, the monitor, but far beyond that.
100%. The Byte was, it was a walk in the park. We kind of approached it expecting it to be comparable to a laptop, and then once you do it, even your packaging simpler because you haven't got a screen to protect, you haven't got batteries, you haven't got certify your packaging and even things like that.
Yeah.
And there's no display calibration, no built-in speakers. So it was so much less work than we anticipated because we thought it's basically another one. We'll save a bit of time here and there, but that was so small. I think the new Starlight's probably been the most the trickiest one we've done. That sort of that has been a rabbit hole on sort of doing things because it was. So we had our 11.6 inch Starlight, which is a classic clamshell, and it basically became impossible to make cheaply. When we first started making them, they were £300. I think they're £300, including VAT. So US dollars, it's $320, something like that. Very cost effective, and it was growing. And then it hit a point where no one was making screens that small. You just couldn't get stuff around the right voltages. The processors had moved on to their more powerful, so say an N100 generating too much heat to fit in that chassis. So if we basically continued making these little things which were desirable because they were cheap and small, they would have been $700-800, and it was just things had moved on.
And that's the problem with doing like niche hardware, because MOQs rule everything, right? And it's so difficult to do niche hardware and compete with the big guys, right? Because you simply do not have a fighting chance really to compete on price with the big guys, right? Because they are churning out so many large volume. So like, how have you, obviously you have your niche, but what's the, I want to go back to the laptop conversation in a second, but you get kind of queued up that because I'm really curious about like how you position that. And obviously you have your user base; it's obviously far more tech savvy and all that. But how do you? What's your rebuttal to that pushback? Because obviously, yes, you can shrink your margins, but you still have to run a business, right? So I'm curious about how those conversations have gone.
So I think, if you take that one, the Starlight example, it's not viable to do anymore. So we essentially turned it into a tablet, so a slightly bigger tablet. Because sort of going against that curve, if we wanted to build a screen, because no one was building them anymore, you're talking hundreds of thousands of toolings. We've never had a screen made for us. It's just unless you had a bunch of people who are so set on having that product, which that's a niche inside of a niche inside of a niche. It's just doesn't happen on any scale to make it viable.
Yeah, exactly. And in the laptop right now, and I guess in the Byte as well, how much off the shelf components and how much is like custom made? Like, do you make from scratch, like beyond software, of course?
Breakdown. Byte's probably got a few more, I guess, open tooling things. What we've done with quite a lot of our things is we've used, so rather than making the top cover of the Byte from entire scratch, find it and make the changes we want to make it nice. So I think the Byte is probably closest thing to stock available designs, parts available. I think we have sort of evolved to more of that approach than anything. It depends on the model. So the Starlight, the new Touch one, we built the keyboards ourselves from scratch because everything we found was rubbish.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's yeah, it's weighing up cost and how good it is. Starfighter, we made literally everything on that. Starbuck now we've got off the shelf speakers, batteries off the shelf, switches we share with someone we're not allowed to say who we share with them with, but one of the big boys. Yeah, so it's very case by case.
If you were to embark on the same mission again to do the laptop again, to the Starfighter again, like what was your biggest like learning of like, oh crap, we spend so much money or so much time on this one thing that if we only knew this, we'd have saved us up a world of pain. Is there any particular thing that springs to mind?
Fingerprint readers. I think
Oh,
it wasn't crazy high. I think it was about I'm say $19,000. Put a little fingerprint reader on the trackpad, and
right,
this was it started because people were asking us to want a fingerprint reader.
sure,
Um, Catch 22 is your trackpad alignment is much harder when you've got a fingerprint in there because you can't just use the cut out any input cover. So there were failures during production. Obviously, this is just cost. It's not actually things go that bad. And then you
right,
get to the people who've asked for the fingerprint reader, but then realise that in Linux, all it's going to do is log you in. You've still got to type your password in to unlock your keychain, and therefore it's pretty pointless. So then people ask us for an option: can we disable the fingerprint reader? So it was like, oh, okay, that was pointless. So I think we kept them in. I think 2 generations, and now they're gone. And yeah, I highly doubt we'll go back unless something changes on the Linux side. Yeah, that's a learning
interesting.
experience.
In terms of Linux distros, where's your stance on that, right? Because I know, I mean, System 76, they are a bit more opinionated. They have their Pop OS.
Yeah.
Where do you guys stand on that? How do you see that shaping up on your end?
So we try to stay agnostic. We don't want to have a favorite or say this one, and we don't want to build our own. We want to stick to our focus, which is
Mm-hmm.
the hardware and firmware. Um, we essentially, if people ask us to offer one installed, if we can do it and there's enough demand, then we'll do it. So yeah, Cubes popped up because of that. Fedora will be available soon. And then there's one other list. Leap is coming up. So yeah, really it is as long as if people want it and it works and we can install it, we'll put it on. Just because in terms of if it'll actually work, that's more down to Linux itself than the distro.
Yeah.
How it looks doesn't really affect technical capabilities of a computer. So.
And speaking of that, in terms of when obviously hardware enablement in the Linux kernel, I guess when you pick components like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, whatever it may be, do you always go for things that work out of the box, or do you go down the path of, oh crap, this is not what's supported, let's patch it up ourselves and contribute upstream? How do you see that for like enablement, I guess?
So we've always done it as we build it for what's working
Okay.
in the kernel. We've never tried to add support for a new device, just because I mean even also say we did it now, we did a new sound card or whatever it might be, you add support for it, and then people still want us to install say Zorin. I think that's the oldest thing that we've got in there. That's still running 6.8. So we add support for a driver in 6.16. We're not going to be able to offer a Zorin on that for probably another 4 years, and then you get to this all versioning things like that, whereas something's already supported. Chances are it's been there for 10 years, so you can use any kernel version. It's just simpler.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. And I mean, it's yeah, because you can't really control that ecosystem at all, really, particularly if you look at upstream, right? So it's it makes a lot of sense. We talk about what makes it hard to make a device from scratch, but I guess let's go back to the horror days of COVID. And I'm curious about how you guys lived through the supply chain crisis that impacted everybody in that world, right? In the entire hardware world. Like, how did you get out of that alive? Like, how was that? I'm curious about your first-hand experience of dealing with those massive crises.
Yeah, fun. So Yeah. So fortunately, right before COVID, we had just had, I think it was 2 big shipments. So it
Oh,
was kind of good timing for us. So we had a bit of inventory to keep us going for a bit. But then after that, off that, everyone's prices, from all of our suppliers, went up. There was, I almost know the figures off the top of my head, but sound card. Um, I think it was like $1.90 we used to buy them for, and in COVID it was $32 or something like that. So some components were just
that's hard to pass on.
through the roof. So I think we swallowed some of them and bumped the prices up for others, and then lead times became really long because production lines couldn't be as efficient, and then shipping was congested. And so essentially, I think we made it through it for fortunate timing because we just had a delivery,
Right.
and then also the fact that everyone was in the same position. No one could,
Right.
get anything new. So everyone was very understanding about things taking a lot longer and costing them more. So I think it was luck, luck.
Yeah, fair enough.
And our customers.
And speaking about that a bit, like who are your customers today? Like, like, is it mostly consumers, or are they being picked up by enterprises more? How do you kind of navigate that, and what do you focus on?
We don't focus on anything, so we don't, target one specific group. Like after Profile X or this type of company.
Right.
It's literally as random as anything. We've got companies that everyone knows the name of, to teeny tiny companies who sort of map out manholes and things like that, to someone who wants to use cubes because they want to be private, to someone who's annoyed with Microsoft. It literally is your biggest, most diverse customer base you'll ever get. I mean, sometimes we even have people pop up who are sort of Linux developers, and that say things that just literally goes over our head because they know more about Linux than we do.
Right.
So it's insanely diverse. There definitely isn't this is our key person. Anyway.
And in terms of volume, can you speak a bit about like how many units you've sold, or how many you're selling per year, or like any order of magnitude numbers?
We're probably close to 10,000 at the moment. The numbers
in total,
mainly,
or
per year.
per year? Okay.
Since we started, don't know. I'd have to check. But most of the quantities come from the Starlight. Is definitely our best seller at the moment.
Okay.
That's a lot. It's quite hard to make enough.
And if you compare you guys with, obviously we have, I guess in the last decade, I say we had System 76 kind of done this, guys. You guys have been in this game. Framework seems to be getting a lot of, obviously is, I guess, slightly more recent. How much collaboration is there between you guys in terms of like raising the bar for Linux on the desktop? Is there any at all, or?
Not really. We don't really engage with many of the others. I think you cross paths with System 76 occasionally on a Coreboot patch that's being upstreamed. But in terms of anyone else, we don't really run into them, so to speak. I don't think we work on the same things. I mean, me and Matt mainly work on upstream Coreboot, and that's quite a sort of, smallish group of people who work on it, which is pretty much me, Matt, a bunch of Google engineers, and then Siemens are there, and a bunch of Intel engineers, and then I think most of the others primarily work on downstream forks. So there isn't that much crossover. On the Linux side, it just doesn't really come up.
That's fair enough. I mean, and what do you? I mean, obviously, Coreboot is close to your heart, and like, where do you?
Biased,
what I mean, do you see a world where it will become more mainstream, where it becomes a viable, real alternative to AMI and the likes of and Phoenix and all those guys? How do you see the maturity of that?
I don't think it would be Coreboot, because Coreboot's quite stuck in its ways, not in a bad way, but stuck in its ways for sort of mainstream vendors to pick it up and it become approachable. I think an open source alternative is possible. Because AMI dropped their open source one, I think it was a couple of years ago, has a very streamlined little EVK2 base, or that or Slim bootloader, I guess. But I think those could appeal to someone like Dell or someone like that, because you get the benefits of open source, the shared platform, code management, but they're not going to be completely learning how to do things again. Because going from AMI to Coreboot, they are entirely different. Whereas AMI to Slim bootloader is still EVK2, so it's pretty much the same thing.
Okay, so that's where you would you think. Do you see the future of Coreboot more being in custom tailored embedded vendors like yourself? Is that purely plus I guess Google with the Chromebooks? Is that the future you see of it, or so?
I guess so.
If you say you're not going to go mainstream, right?
Yeah, I don't think it will for sort of computers in general, mini PCs, laptops, etc. Not overly au fait on the topic, but I seem to remember reading that Tesla used it in their cars. Whether that's right or not, they've definitely got a fork of it that's popped up. But I think that sort of implementation, I guess, could grow, because if you want a lightweight, fast bootloader with no junk in it, Coreboot is the dream.
Yes,
I think Meta have a fork of it as well. So I could see.
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because I know there are people in the Coreboot world that has been at Meta before, right? So that doesn't surprise me at all. Interesting. So yeah, I'm really bullish on Coreboot. I would love to see our devices running on Coreboot at Screenly, but we're not quite there yet, right? Maybe there's a future scenario with that. Because I like the lockdown approach, right? With like slim as possible attack vector, because I think there are more, like we have seen more attack vectors against biases, and I think that's just going to keep coming, right? So I don't think that's hardly over, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go things back. I want to go back a little bit to your origin story and kind of talk a little bit more about that. You mentioned Clevo before. For people not familiar, it's come up before on the show, but I don't think we had a proper explanation. Let's start there. What is Clevo? And just for the users who are not familiar, I know we already mentioned it, so probably worth it at least a brief explanation of what that is.
Sure. My obviously experience is 7 years out of date, but as far as I know, they still do exactly the same thing. They don't sell their things directly. You don't go into a shop and buy this is our laptop one, whatever. They are primarily designed to be white labeled. So 7 years ago, they have a chassis, and then they've built it to be configurable to whoever's ordering it. Do you want the 50 watt hour battery, or do you want a 30 watt hour battery and 2 SSDs? And it's all designed so people can order it in their implementation of it. And the theory is people buy these, stick their logo on it, choose option lists, buying a new car sort of type list of things that you can do, and then they don't have to pay for tooling, pay for thousands at a time, and all the other complexities that come with doing it.
And do they blow fuses on the boards and patch or do you have the ability to patch your own BIOS on there, put your own BIOS on there, or?
The way it was back then is that you did maintain their own internal firmware, so you could get updates for, I think it was 6 months or something like that, from their AMI firmware. But you couldn't. You'd have to, if you wanted to do it, you'd have to port it yourself, because you have to do your license independently. With AMI, which you have to pay per board, whereas they're already paying for it, so it's a bit convoluted.
Got it. Okay. I got two more things I want to cover with regards to Linux on the desktop, obviously, which is a big topic. But the first one is, you mentioned firmware updates, right? How do you go about that? I've had Richard Hughes on before talking about firmware update. How do you what do you make of the firmware update life cycle on Linux today? And what do you guys suggest for your customers to do firmware updates, particularly over there, right? If you're talking about larger fleet deployments, enterprise deployments, and so forth, right? What do you guys recommend for that?
We are spoken to Richard for a long time. The preferred method is Firmware Update Manager. It's built into pretty much every distro now, and generally speaking, it works. We've seen our use of it has tailed off a bit because there's been a lot of issues, especially on Arch, because they build and push things so fast, and especially things, the lockdown side of things in the kernel has been dialed up compared to where it was a year ago, and lots of things have stopped working. So yeah, it's the preferred one. It's wicked. You upload something to the LVFS, it'll run tests on it, it'll check it's fine, it'll get signed by us. It'll be checked it hasn't changed whilst you're downloading it. I mean, there's a long list of benefits. And yeah, up until recently, it works on every distro. A few hiccups, I think, which will probably smooth over in the next 6 months, a year, hopefully. So it's back to working everywhere.
And you provide your BIOS updates in the LVFS,
yes.
So you can just pull them down from there.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And that works for Coreboot and for your AMA, because I believe you still ship with AMA as well as an option for.
No. So that's all gone. So yeah, in LVFS now we've got Coreboot updates, you've got SSD updates, because we've been working with Lexar quite recently. We used to work with Phison, and yeah, Lexar have actually been really wicked about tuning their SSDs to work well with Coreboot, with a bunch of extra timings and stuff. So we've got our own firmware for Lexar SSDs. Touchscreen updates, keyboard updates, hub updates. I mean, pretty much everything we do is in there if we've had to update it.
Very nice.
Yeah, Richard is absolutely wicked in that regard. Because we were speaking to him about how to update their keyboards on the new lights. And I think almost word for word, his reply was, "I accidentally wrote you a plugin. Try this out." So it's literally, here's a firmware file, and yeah, it just worked brilliantly. And yeah, we were pushing updates out for that for 9 months or so. So
amazing. Oh, that's really cool. Kind of the last thing I wanted to cover is Linux on a desktop, 2025. What are the biggest shortcomings? Is it still in power management, or where do you see the biggest weaknesses in Linux on a desktop today compared to alternative ecosystems, I guess?
Tricky one.
Too many?
To be honest, I don't think it's too bad. Because yeah, I mean, we've as a company, we've grown massively in the last year, and so we've brought on people. When we started, it was everyone used Linux, so it was never really a question of what operating system are you going to use. Do you know how to use Linux? That was just a given. And obviously, we've had to bring on people who are have skills in other areas rather than Linux.
Right.
And each one of them has been thrust a laptop with Linux now, and we haven't had any sort of internal support questions, if you like, or anything else like that.
Uh-huh.
I think you get the occasional one of I can't. I think Apple Music people who aren't into the Linux ecosystem want to use that and things like that. So I don't think there's anyone major drawback. I think it really is quite solid now. Obviously that's me saying it, who's used Linux for a long time. So yeah, I'm going to be not the most neutral in that regard, but yeah,
because historically power management has always been Achilles' heel, right? Like I just even to this day, people they don't hibernate. They just when I'm done with my laptop, I'm gonna shut down before I put it in my bag. All right, which is I left the Linux world as my daily driver many years ago in favor of the Apple ecosystem for various reasons. But that was one thing that I remember vividly. The first time he was like, "Wait, it just hibernates and it doesn't drain the battery when it's hibernated."
But that's one of the things that still, to be fair, shocks me. And people will sort of send in a message and stuff like that. It's like, does suspend your work when you use Ubuntu on your laptop? And you're just like, yes. It's almost shocking that people think that it doesn't work with a laptop that's designed to work for Linux. I mean, if you can suspend it, it's something's broken. And I think a lot of that comes from people buying stuff that wasn't designed to it. Probably hasn't been updated in years. And it doesn't work. So yeah, it's I think low expectation bar from quite a lot of people.
So there's nothing that you still struggle with that you would like to see greatly improved. Is it just really parity across compared to everything else, or there must be some areas that you feel like this area really would need some love, right?
I mean, yeah, I think I'll be biased by recent experience, but I think sort of more sort of continuity and testing and things like that. So we've had an absolute wave of bugs on the Arch side recently, and part of that is because of the best thing about Arch is the worst thing is because if it's newer, they'll include it, just as a rule, and so you get a lot of bugs slipping through. So I think, I think a little bit more continuity and testing would probably do it well, from bugs and things like that. But it still is, using Arch as the example, the best and worst thing. If you find an issue on it, they'll fix it in a couple of days. So it's definitely not the end of the world.
Interesting. And on that note, on a desktop, how many proprietary blobs do you need to run your devices today? Because I would imagine not everything is open source that runs there, right? So talk to me about that. How does that look like a landscape today?
So everything Intel based. We'll keep it simple. You've got a descriptor which is a blob, but it's so tiny and Coreboot can modify them that no one's ever bothered to change them. So you've got the descriptor. You've got the ME. You'll likely always have the ME. And then you have FSP, which people like us and everyone who works on Coreboot has source code for, so they've never bothered to try and attack. So in terms of the ones firmware-wise that people aren't too happy about, it's the ME. And OS-wise, you got wireless card, which wireless cards have had blobs for donkeys. I mean, some people cling to there was a brand of wireless cards that used to put blobs on the chip, and everyone thought it was brilliant because you could use a distro that didn't provide blobs, negating the fact that it could never be updated.
Pretty big oversight.
Athros. People go, I want an Athros card because I don't want I want a blob-free OS, and it's like you could technically do it, but then you just got an outdated blob that's burnt into your card, so it's kind of defeats the point. Wireless card, ME, I guess they're the ones that people don't want but are there out of requirement.
And I guess Bluetooth included in that, the wireless card.
Yes,
I guess that's a dual function card, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, they are two separate blobs that the distro will throw at it. But
yeah. Amazing. So, Sean, what lays ahead for Star Labs in the next 12 months? What are you guys focusing on? What should people be on the lookout for?
It will almost make it sound a bit boring. It is more of the same. It is just involving down the features that people have asked us for. The biggest one is people asking us to make the haptic trackpad available on a smaller laptop. Because we've done it on Fighter, and people go, "This is wicked," because only Apple have done this, but I don't want to spend $3,000 on a laptop. And that was the theory of the Fighter, that we make something that had everything on it, didn't look at the costs. So we've got that coming to a cheaper model, which would be very cool. Really it is everything sort of just filling out requests, more kill switches, camera filters, things like that, sort of going more into it's almost going more into the niche, which is now becoming more mainstream because people are becoming a lot more sort of privacy aware.
100%. Interesting. Good. Well, is there anything you want to wrap up and talk about before we hit the repo? Anything people should be aware of? Otherwise, beyond the roadmap, things that people should be, learn more about you guys, or anything else you want to do a shout out about?
Not off the top of my head. We've got a few bits working on firmware side of things, which will be very cool to come out. So just insane levels of customizability. Can't talk today, it's been a long week. But a bunch of things on that side, which this is just really pulling together everyone's requests. So your firmware menus get incredibly long, so you can do literally exactly what you want. You're talking some very strange features that only one person in the planet has requested, but we've included it because it is a bunch of firmware stuff, new hardware choices, more toys. That's about it.
Amazing. And if people want to learn more about Star Labs, where do they go?
Where do they go?
Yes.
Starlabs.systems.
Amazing. Perfect. Sean, this has been very fun. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Have a good one. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.